After earning his Juris Doctorate degree in 2004 from Pepperdine School of Law, he joined the International Justice Mission. He served on the legal team in their Mumbai field office combating sex trafficking and forced prostitution. In 2008, he was promoted to the directorial post on the IJM Mumbai field office and led a team of 40. In 2012, he moved to Delhi and started an organization called Counsel to Secure Justice, which provides legal and psychosocial support during criminal proceedings to survivors of sexual violence. Beginning operations in 2013, CSJ has represented more than 170 clients who have suffered child sexual abuse in Delhi district courts. The topic that Jonathan is going to present on today is Restorative Justice, an alternative to Retributive Justice. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan.
I came to India 12 years ago, and I was a legal fellow fresh from law school. And my idea of justice was narrow in that it was very much about punishing the traffickers, the brothel keepers that had been arrested through our work that we were doing. So very much that narrow lens. During my time though with IJM and just working with survivors of trafficking, I also saw justice as being healing and rehabilitation of children that we had rescued. They should have access to medical care, to counseling. They should be protected, should have protective shelter, and have access to financial compensation to help them in their rehabilitation. And even beyond that, looking forward, they should have job training and job skills that can help them get back on their feet. Moving to Delhi to start CSJ, working with child sexual abuse in the area of child sexual abuse, about 30% of our cases are incest. It's been another kind of progression, evolution of what my idea of justice is. And that's what I want to focus on today. And I just want to ask everyone, I think, and I was having a conversation yesterday, I think we all need to ask ourselves and question, what is justice to us? And really, are the systems that are in place really delivering justice? I'll focus on three characteristics of child sexual abuse that we've already talked about, really. But really, I think there are issues and there are characteristics that weave together and can't really be separated from one another. Child sexual abuse in India is pervasive. We talked about how the percentages, but about 21% of children had suffered severe sexual abuse, according to the 2000 study of Ministry of Women and Child Development. It's hidden. Most cases don't come forward, or most children or victims don't come forward about sexual abuse, and it happens within existing relationships. And I'll start there. Really, child sexual abuse, or sexual abuse in general, is involving relationships. Is involving crime that's occurring within families, within communities, and at the levels that sexual abuse, or how pervasive it is, it touches everybody within the community. These numbers are from the National Crime Records Bureau, and from 2015, 95.5% of perpetrators are known to the victims. And then Ms. Acharya from Childline yesterday had also talked about that just from her experience. It reflected these same thoughts, that most perpetrators are known to victims. And not only that, but they're in positions of trust. They're in positions of authority, family members, relatives, school teachers, friends of family. And this is really significant when we're talking about the idea of abuse and reporting abuse. So just breaking down the numbers, and this is illustrative, it's not scientific, but if we have 472 million children in India, 21% about children suffer sexual abuse. Yet last year, according to the National Crime Records Bureau, less than 11,000 cases were reported to police in 2015. Breaking that down, that's 11/100% of all cases are reported to the police. So huge gap of what's actually going to be reported. And really, this is the problem, right? This is the problem. Not only that, it's hidden, it's pervasive, it's hidden, but the cases that the children that do come forward about sexual abuse, they enter into a system that's ineffective. And that's why I think Medio's programs are so important, that these children who do come forward, they need to have advocates to help them secure justice. Because we have low conviction rates. Well over 29% conviction rate across India last year. Justice is delayed. We took cases starting in April of 2013, and the majority of those cases still are not finished. And really, the negative impact on the victim and the family that the process has. And to talk about this a little bit more, I'm going to share two of our cases. Both of them are incest cases. Our clients named Shevia and Neha. And I'm going to try to put it in perspective, really to contrast how the criminal justice system has worked in these cases. Practically, as far as how it's impacted them and their families' lives. Shevia was 15 years old when she was raped by her 19-year-old brother for the first time. When she told her mother about the abuse, rather than believing her mother beat her. And so it's no surprise then that when her brother raped her again, instead of going to her mother, Shevia ran away from home. She befriended a stranger, and the stranger helped her register a case with the police. The brother was arrested, put in jail, denied bail. Shevia was put into a protective shelter, and that's where we met her. And as you can imagine, she was wavering back and forth about whether or not to testify against her brother. But our counselor worked with her and was able to give her the strength to be able to do that. Whenever the parents, the family, the mother would come to visit Shevia, they would pressure her to retract the story because of the hardship that she was bringing to the family. But when she came to court to testify, we sat with her and she was able to effectively carry out and tell the truth about what her brother had done with her during chief examination. Unfortunately, the judge adjourned the matter before she could complete her cross-examination. And the next day, the Child Welfare Committee restored Shevia back with her family. And as you can imagine, what would happen next? The family pressured her. She changed her story. So 4.5 months later, when she went to complete her testimony, she said that she had been lying the entire time. She made the story up. The judge acquitted in that case. The next day, the judge closed evidence. The day after that, the judge acquitted the case. And so now the brother is back, released from bail, and Shevia is back with her family. And this happened, and it made me so angry. It seemed like such an injustice had been carried out. And it's true. If she would have completed her testimony on the same day, then there likely would have been a conviction in that case. There's a second case. It's Neha. Neha is a 17-year-old girl. She's very quiet. She was in her village, living in her village in the Himalayan foothills, and she wanted to become a doctor. So she traveled to Delhi to live with her father, who was working as a driver, so she could study for her medical entrance examinations. One summer evening, Neha was in bed, sick with a fever, and her father came home from driving duty drunk. He gagged her mouth with a towel, forced himself upon her, and raped her. And this continued to happen for a couple of months until Neha had the courage to run away from home. We met Neha in a protective shelter, and that's where we counseled her and were able to draw out the story. Her mother, again, didn't believe her and was pressuring her to change her story. When Neha went to court to testify, her mother was there. And I remember our advocate, after she had done her testimony, coming and telling me this story, and it shocked me. She boldly told what had happened to her in court in front of her mother, and after she was walking off from the stand after court proceedings, her mother approached her, had ashes of a dead person in her hand, and threw the ashes at her and said, "You are dead to me. You're not my daughter anymore." But she was bold, and she continued on with the case, and the case actually led to a conviction. The judge sentenced the father to life imprisonment, gave Neha 1.3 lakh in financial compensation. And Neha actually continued on. She studied to become a nurse, and she's continued to study to be a nurse. But really looking at this situation, there was justice, right? As far as looking at narrowly, there was a conviction in this case. Neha got the financial compensation. But really, if you look at the nature and the relationships with the family and how they've been damaged, Neha is carrying with her the burden that because of her testimony, her father is in jail. Her family is blaming her. Her mother has emotionally murdered her, right? Rejected her. And so there's that brokenness that really, you can't be happy, even in these cases, for conviction. And so that's why I want to question you, what is justice? And I'm talking from the example of incest cases, but we're really looking at this idea because we're all dealing with relationships and harm that have been done within the family with known persons. So what is justice? And even really in Neha's case, and this is brought up by Vidya, the father was in prison, but would it change your mind? It's about a couple of weeks ago now that the father has been released on bail pending appeal in case. So now he's free to be back with the family. And so this idea of retributive justice is really, and the adversarial system is what we see as the justice delivery system in the Western world. And it focuses on three questions. What law was broken? Who broke the law, and what is the punishment? It's very much centered on punishing the offender for breaking the law. And adversarial systems are inherently divisive, even when they work perfectly. Even if it's a sensitive process that's quick, that ends in convictions, there's still issues with it. So beyond really how they are functioning on the ground, beyond the delays, the re-victimization, the calling children multiple times to court. Beyond all of that, the system itself is very grueling for victims. It's minimal participation, so victims really don't have much of a say or a voice in the process, and it tears the family apart. As far as the system itself, during the system, children are vulnerable, children and their families, while they're awaiting testimony especially, are vulnerable to threats and intimidation to retract their story, which is what happened in Chevia's case. But even vulnerable to physical threats, especially by those who are related or affiliated with the offender. It's a hostile environment for the child, that even if there's somebody to sit with that child in court, the whole idea of cross-examination is not to validate and to believe the child, but it's to make to break down that child's credibility and to make her out to be a liar. There's no incentive for offenders to admit the abuse, which is important for children who are victims of abuse. And even if there's a conviction, which is what happened in Neha's case, the burden and the guilt really continues on with the child. Because no matter how broken families are, it's still a family, and there's still love there. Victims have minimal participation in the process, or voice in the justice process. They are going to testify, and that's it. And they're more seen as a means to an end of a conviction, rather than having inherent value, their stories having an inherent value in themselves as far as trying to validate the child. And there's no opportunity for children to ask questions to the offender or to ask them to explain the impact that the abuse has had. And it tears the family apart. Like what happened in both cases, the family blames the child for what's going on. They don't believe the child. There's pressure to retract the story. There's separation. The family's broken apart. The child is separated from the family and put into protective shelter a lot of times because the family's not a safe place for the child to be. And then the offender, who is oftentimes the breadwinner, is separated from the family. And so there's lack of emotional support and financial support, which again goes into why the family will blame the child for the abuse. and going to court. And really, where we're at right now is our focus really is on the law. Like when we're saying, let's protect our children, we have the Protection of Children from Sexual Offenses Act. Let's protect our children through the law and through this adversarial system that delivers justice. So we've focused a lot of attention on this. We've focused a lot of attention on improving the law, on improving procedures. So we have POCSO. We have the amended 2013 Indian Penal Code and Evidence Act and Criminal Procedure Code. We have harsher punishments, evidentiary provisions that really favor the victim, even to me, which I think goes too far in favor of the victim as far as shifting the burden of proving that the abuse did not occur to the child or to the offending child. Consent is irrelevant. So all of these provisions really to make the likelihood of conviction much more, which are overall very good. Then we have provisions that are more controversial, like treating child offenders as adults for heinous sexual offenses. Mandatory reporting, so trying to force people to come forward about the abuse. There's greater protections for victims during criminal proceedings. And then laws that give rights to speedy justice, both for the child to testify within 30 days and for the child or the trial to finish. And again, we have different levels of implementation. Really, generally, it's not being implemented well for the most part. But still, the entire focus has been on the law. And I think our assumptions underlying this is that if there's certainty of convictions with harsh punishments, it will deter potential offenders. And more victims will report if there's swift justice and there are more child-friendly processes and they can get access to support services. And really, this is true, right? But I don't think this addresses the entire problem, or really even the main part of the problem. Because going back to these numbers, if you think about it, 99.99% of children are outside of the protection of the law because the cases remain hidden and they are never reported to the police. And so we're focusing on this one area, which while very important, it's a small fraction of the cases that actually go into the system. And so that's why I think we need to raise questions about what do we want? What are the goals from our justice delivery system that we want? And really, what is justice? Are we looking at justice through the eyes of the victim? Are we projecting our own ideas of justice onto what they should have as justice? We're doing research right now on restorative justice, and one of the areas that we're looking at, or one of the areas we've done as part of our research, is interview victims of sexual abuse, both adults and children. And the common theme is it's not necessarily that they want their father punished necessarily. Although that is part of the equation, and especially if it's fresh, the abuse is fresh, that's something that comes up as far as teaching, or as far as punishment and having the offender hanged. But more than that, what they want is they want to be safe. They want the abuse to stop. They want to be validated and believed. So they want the offender to tell them that what they had done was wrong. And not only them, but to other people who know about the abuse. They want their family to believe them and to acknowledge the abuse that's occurred. They want vindication. They do want vindication, but it comes more in the thought of shaming or public acknowledgement of what has happened that's wrong. And really what's been so striking in this, and really endearing, is that they're so concerned about their families. They want their families to be okay. And so that's part of the justice process as well for them. We had one client who said, one of the adult survivors that had time to reflect, she said, justice is not the offender going to jail for 7 years. It's for that child receiving counseling for 7 years so she can be stronger and live a better life. And so I think we need to think differently And we have to get outside of this box of thinking what justice is and how it should be delivered. And I think we need to look at what goals do we want from our criminal justice system. And I think we need to create an environment where more children and their families disclose sexual abuse and pursue justice. What can we do so more children, that empowers more children to come forward and report sexual abuse, for mothers who know and who are witnesses about the abuse to report it and to feel comfortable with it, and not only report it or disclose it, but to pursue justice. And really, what does justice mean when we say pursue justice? And we need to create mechanisms to secure justice effectively and compassionately that's really keeping the victim central to the process. And so that's where the idea of restorative justice comes in. And it's really kind of this journey that I've been talking about, where I really see this as a way, as an alternative, not as a replacement, but as a better way to give justice in some of these cases. And it focuses on 3 different questions. It looks at the harm that's been done. Who was harmed? It looks at what are the needs that have resulted from that harm. And asks the question, who has the obligations to meet those needs? And it's a victim-centered, dialogue-driven approach that brings together the victim, the offender, and other stakeholders. The offender has to admit the abuse, so that's a starting point. And I say he generally, he has to apologize. And then the victim has to choose to participate. So you have to have those 2 things, admission of the abuse and apology, and the victim desiring and choosing to want to go forward. And then there's accountability still, but the accountability is more about what are you going to do to repair the harm, to make things right, at least as best as possible. And kind of going back to victims choosing to participate, really that's what we're looking at. Giving the child, giving the victim, the family more agency to choose how to go forward with addressing the abuse. Some may want to go forward with the criminal justice system in an adversarial approach. Others may not want to, but to give them that choice. As far as what an accountability plan looks like, you're looking at needs like protecting the child, the victim, but then also other children as well who could be victimized. And it goes towards obviously separating the offender from the abuser, but also, what are we going to do to strip away power that the abuser, the offender, has taken advantage of to abuse? So looking at those questions and coming up with solutions or remedies. Repairing harm to the victim, which can look like restitution, so from the past harm that's been done, but also looking at symbolic issues for vindication. We had one child say that she wanted the person to, he had gone and he had been released and he had bragged about the abuse that had occurred. And instead of being, he said, what can they do to me? And she said, I want him to go to every person that he told this to and to say that he was wrong and that what he did was wrong. And then it looks at reforming the offender. And really this is key, because when we look at harm in restorative justice, the harm is not only to the victim a lot of times, but a lot of times offenders are victims themselves. And so it's looking at this not as such a black and white individual issue, but more broadly as an issue that's affecting offenders as well. So what can we do to make the offender, to help reform the offender, to put that offender in a position where he's not going to, or she's not going to abuse or offend again? And then empowering the victim and giving the victim opportunities to succeed. I was in Kerala a couple of months ago, and one of the cases that, it was a case, but one of the things that the judges had given to a survivor of sexual abuse is property. So these ideas of looking at justice not just as restitution, but really because they have been harmed, what can we do to really empower these children and these victims so they can succeed? The benefits for victims is it's a victim-centered process. They have much more opportunities to participate in the process. It helps with emotional healing and closure. They're able to ask questions to the offender. Why did you do this? This is the impact that it's had on me, and that helps just psychologically with closure. It's a victim-friendly process that's very much can be flexible and can meet the victim's needs. In fact, the victim has an opportunity to choose or even have a say in where this should take place and who should be participating in the process. As far as benefits of the offender, again, he has to admit the abuse and take responsibility for his actions, which is not there in the criminal justice process. And there's a greater likelihood to reform, not only from the counseling perspective, but he's hearing, looking into the victim's eyes and seeing this person as a real person that has been harmed and what the impact has been done on that person. And then there's benefits for the community. It's a swifter process, lower costs, and generally lower recidivism. I was in San Francisco last month, and I had spoken with a restorative justice practitioner there. And they are doing a study on restorative. They have a project in Oakland, California for restorative justice. Not sexual abuse, but generally restorative justice program as far as recidivism. And the district attorney there is fully on board and sees the value of this. And they did a study. And as far as recidivism rates, it showed that juveniles that have gone through the restorative justice process had a 5% recidivism rate, which means committing the offenses again. Whereas juveniles who did not go through this process, it was a 55% recidivism rate. So it can have a great impact on that. And ideally, if we have these processes, more people will come forward about sexual abuse, either victims or witnesses, and feel more comfortable to be able to talk about it. Obviously, there's risks, and this is what we have to really be careful of. There's risks of re-victimization. We're talking about power imbalances between the offender and the victim. Power imbalances with the family and the pressure that the family might place on the victim to act a certain way. There's a lot of concerns about offenders manipulating the process so they can get easy justice. And you have issues of confidentiality and keeping these issues or whatever's discussed within the process confidential and not to be used against the offender especially. And just poor oversight and accountability. But there are safeguards that we can put in place both before the process, as far as individual counseling sessions, both with the offender and the victim, and then group counseling, so there's a good understanding of what is the state of mind of the victim, of the offender, and of also the people who are participating in the process. During the process, you have support persons for both the offender and the victim, so there's more equality through the process. And you have accountability plans where the victim's voice will hold influence. And there can be an independent review of accountability plans to make sure that they're fair and will address the harm that's been done. And so really, when I talk about this, in fact, the last time I spoke about this to the group, someone raised their hand and says, but you've got to punish the offender. Because it's an offensive idea a lot of times. And I think it really does clash with where we're at as society. It's soft on justice. People should be paid back for wrongdoing. It gives society the wrong message, and offenders can easily manipulate the process. But I want us again to think about the problems and really also think differently, because other people have had offensive and crazy ideas. We had Gandhi, who mobilized this nation. And instead of gaining independence through violence and through weapons, he was able to convince people to use nonviolent civil disobedience to have Britain quit India. You have Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela. In South Africa during apartheid, blacks were systematically murdered, raped, tortured. But they were able to convince the nation that instead of having trials where people were independently prosecuted for these offenses, in order for the nation to heal and move forward, they would have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission where the truth of what had happened would be established and the offenders would admit to the abuse that they had done or the atrocities that they had committed. I'll start with that question.
Sure.
There's that illustration that I showed, that if 21% of children are saying that they're being sexually abused,
Okay.
and there's 472 million children in India, but yes, less than 11,000 cases were reported to the police. There's a huge gap. And I'm not saying it's 99.99%, it's more of an illustration that I was trying to deduce.
Okay.
So that's kind of starting there.
Yeah.
So that's not scientific study where I pulled it all. But I also do think it shows that there are complexities because of the relationships that do keep hidden. And I think we do have to look at that. And that's why I see restorative justice as more of an approach where we're really looking at those relationships that are keeping the abuse hidden. Going to your power, I agree. And it's really, I think power imbalances, especially in India, is going to be a key concern when we're doing if we ever do these kinds of processes. But you can really weed out, and again, what I'm saying is I'm not advocating for restorative justice system to replace the criminal justice system, but only in certain cases. And so if you have an effective pre-restorative justice process sessions, you'll be able to weed out things like whether the offender is apologizing and showing remorse. You can identify areas of victim blaming or not believing part of the victim, both not only for the offender but other people who are participating in the process. You can get an idea of the offender's mindset. And so you're able to really, from the victim's perspective, a counselor will be able to sit with that child and be able to identify whether it's really her true, authentic choice to move forward with the process or whether she's being pressured by the family. You'll have opportunities to talk with the family together about the issues. So there's a lot of discussion that's going on beforehand. So before you would move to the point where you would have the victim and the offender in the same circle process together, you could eliminate a lot of those dangers. Within the circle itself, the reason that I feel that it's important, and other models, it's not just me, other models of having a support person not only for the victim but also the offender is because it can go the other way. You can have the offender feel like he's being he's being ganged up on. So you need that support person also for the offender. But it can also be that support person that follows up with the offender to make sure that what was decided within the circle is actually being implemented. From the victim's perspective, she should have a support person who's there to support her and advocate for her interests. You need to have trained facilitators who can spot some of these issues where the victim could be harmed again. And then the victim can choose who is in that circle. So if there's a family member that had blamed her or that those people should not be a part of the process, but it's people who will believe the victim. So you can have a true dialogue about the abuse. And it won't go past that. And what do we need to repair the harms that have been done?
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. This is Chandrika here from Arpan. I had two questions. One was that about you sharing about what is justice when we talk from a victim's point of view, and I completely agree when you say that it's more about getting the abuser say sorry or acceptance from the family. I agree to that, but we see that more in terms of cases where we see there is incest or someone known from the family. I wanted to know, is there any understanding of victims and their sense of justice when it comes to a stranger abusing the victim? Where there is no relationship, there is no known person, so less complexities within the family. And another question was around providing support for the offender, looking at the offender from more retribution point of view. I understand again from that if we speak from an incest or family perspective or known person perspective, where we giving space for that person to apologize and be part of the family again. But when we look at the different variants of sexual abuse, where a person walking on the road is also being abused, either groped or touched or sexually spoken to. Where does that perspective fits in when we are talking about seeing offender from rehabilitation further?
Yeah. I mean, I think with strangers, when you're dealing with strangers, it's going to be different dynamics. I think so a lot of the things that, as far as the impact it could have on the child, it will look differently. But I think I would just go back again to what does the child want from the process. And again, we're looking at more of a choice. And so even if it's a stranger, is this where the child want to go forward with this? Does the child want to ask this person questions? Why did you choose me? Why was it me that you abused? This is how it's impacted my life. Do you really know that? And so if there's that dialogue, I think it can still help with there to be closure. But I think it's different, and it will depend on the victim and even the level of abuse that's occurred. But it's strangers, it is a different dynamic. And again, I want to kind of go back to, there still is going to be a role for a criminal justice system. And if the victim ever wants to go forward, because say it's a stranger, wants to go forward with the criminal justice system, that's her choice, and she should be able to do that. But I do think as a society, as we're looking instead of backwards at punishing for a law that's been broken, looking forward and saying who was harmed, how can we repair this harm, and look at it from the perspective of not only the victim, but also the stranger, the offender who's done the abuse. What can we do to repair, to help that person as well? And we're looking at it more holistically and really the practical realities of sexual abuse when we are dealing with it within communities, within families that are broken.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Brewer. I'm over here. And I'm the president and CEO of Darkness to Light, which is a US-based nonprofit that focuses solely on adult-focused prevention training for child sexual abuse. And my question to you is, well, first and foremost, I think you put a lot of emphasis on decision-making capabilities of the child. And if it's an older child, sort of, puberty years and up to 18, then fine, that might be possible. But some of the victims that we are discussing are very young. And being able to make those sort of very adult decisions could be quite difficult. So I'm wondering how you deal with that. But my second question is, in terms of the responsibility of reconciliation, don't you think there's a pre-step to this where we begin to reach out to adults and parents and start to have those conversations before something ever happens in their family? And I'll preface that question by saying there was a huge issue with it. We've been around for about 17 years, and in the United States, adults don't want to talk about the fact that their family members may be the ones who are victimizing their children. And it's taken us about 20 years to get to a place where Americans are okay with saying, this is actually a problem and it's my responsibility as an adult to protect the child. So don't you think that there's sort of a larger conversation that has to happen in terms of parents believing their children and helping this restorative process? Because otherwise, to me, it would seem that the child makes the decision and then also has to bring the family along with them in order to get to a place of reconciliation.
First question first. I mean, definitely, you've got to look at the age, maturity, the ability to be able to make decisions. So for very young children, they wouldn't have as much as a say. But we're looking at a case right now where the children were 14 years old and 8 years old. And really the parents were kind of driving what justice would look like for their children. And more what we want to say is the parents will be a part of the process, but at least give that child a voice to be able to to have a say in what the proceedings should look like, to whatever extent she can, but definitely age is an issue. And really, when you're looking at these kinds of processes, it has to be more mature children who have more agency and can make these choices and better decisions for themselves. As regarding just having conversations, I fully agree. And from a prevention level or education level, we need to kind of remove the stigma and the shame that's attached to sexual abuse. Right now, we're going into communities as part of our research, and we're just listening to them. And we're trying to understand, what does violence look like for you? What are some of the taboos? What would help encourage you to speak up about sexual violence? Because it's not the child's responsibility necessarily, but it's the mother who sees the abuse that's occurring. It's the neighbor that sees the abuse to occurring. And so I think we need to have these conversations. We had one of the clients that we interviewed, she said, if somebody would have asked me, I would have told them about the abuse. And so even having that level of conversation, I think that we need to have. And so, but I think this restorative justice for the issues that have occurred or that are occurring, it's a way that people can bring it forward without having to go into a criminal justice process that they might not want to do because of the relationships and the sensitivities that are involved. But I definitely agree with your idea that we need to speak about it more and do more programs that facilitate conversations.